How's everybody doing? Day 293 here, 365 days towards racial change. My name is Tom Lins Nyback. Pleasure to see you again, coming up on that big 300. I wonder what will happen. This is a great project, and it has potential to go in a lot of directions. We'll just see. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but 300 is a big marker. At 365, it's fuzzy. It's starting to come into view, but together we'll get there. By way of current events, because as of like October of 2019, these videos stopped being daily, so there's gaps and things like that. I'm in between school semesters, so I'm catching up a little bit. So current events, we've just drone striked top Iranian general. So if you're, so you'll see this news cycle happens at the beginning of 2020, which I'm glad this project spilled over into 2020. But I just wanted to date the material here a little bit so we're on the same page and focus when I make references to things going on in the world. I want to plug a book that I got by way of a fan. I just got into it, and it's the kind of book you get into it. It's how I felt about Uncle Tom's Cabin, or any book you're interested in, right? You get into it, much like your social media, right? Facebook wasn't just a convenient way to network and stuff like that, but it resonated with some inner human need to be engaged and all that. I don't have that. I'm a bit of an introvert, but that's the idea. Any introverts watching would know what it means to have a physical book in your hand and just go there. So I want to plug a book. I'm not going to. I've just started it, so I can't really comment on it. But it's a book by J.R. Gordon called Drapetomania, and we may talk about that here a little bit. It's about a gay relationship between two slaves. Drapetomania is, and we're going to talk about this more today, mental illness associated with a strong need to run away. I'm going to unpack that more in a few minutes. But I plugged this book, some interesting facets. I'm a writer as well, so this book has erased all the quotation marks. And man, does that clean up the text a whole lot. I didn't know you could do that. And it's the first time I've seen monologues without quotations. I've seen long, a lot of lines of dialogue and monologue with no end quote, but I've never seen good literature with no quotes. So that's a plus. But also the plot, and it resonates well with what we do here at 365 Days Towards Racial Change. And it was the first time I had this thought about fiction of slave life, realities of slave life, slave America. It's never good. Like, even when slaves are jumping the broom, maybe having a peaceful Sunday, it's overshadowed. It's this pressing weight of white oppression, domination, control is over the experience, and there's some interesting bits of drama early on in the book that grabbed me, and it's like, man, being a slave in America is just not good, and having black skin in America, is kind of tolerable. We could never go back. I'd be the first one like executed if white people tried to enslave me. But I'm enslaved in other ways, right? That's one of the things I want to get through to you and us here is that we're not as far from slavery as we think. The people on the lowest rungs of society do not self-determine their lives, right? Neighborhoods infected with drugs and crime and all this stuff, and stigmatisms about the past still linger on here. It's 2020, and uh, I still feel it at times that um, I'm a black man, and I have to step easy and be so considerate because elements of white privilege will feel uncomfortable around me. That's still in society, right? I don't hold my hat in my hand and bow my head, when I'm idle in the presence of white people, and I think that spirit still has a place in society. You see, America planted some seeds back in the 1500s, early on, the beginning of this nation, and these seeds sprouted. Well, one thing we know about a seed, you plant one seed, well, you get a plant with thousands of duplicate seeds, right? And so America had the seed of slavery. It grew and flourished for hundreds of years, and now we cut it back and doing things with our language and sensitivity and inclusion and all this stuff, but we're not. But slavery, I don't know. It's not a flowering plant that maybe comes out once a year or comes from a bulb. It's a weed. It's a vine, and it's got a network, right? If you own property or you've done landscaping, which was one of my plantation duties as a landscaper, you know that some weeds are actually vines, and there's a network in the ground, and the vine is, you could tear the head off it or whatever. The vine is still content to grow even underground, and it'll shoot up all over the place, and it's very hard to get rid of. Well, slavery is that vine in America. Cut it back, try fertilizers and amendments, you know. We try weed killers and sensitivity training, but it's a cancer, right? And there's parts. It's hard. What makes it exponentially hard to eradicate is that there are elements, human elements within American society that are totally okay with it being here because it favors them, it values them. You know, they are they nurture the weed and sell weed killer. I mean, that's something you see. I think the United States has mastered. Condemn a behavior or outcry, but sell guns to the space. You see me chuckle and laugh at a lot of the ills of the world. I try to put a good face on it, or else I'd probably go crazy. I'm not minimizing the seriousness of the world in which we live, the times we're in. 2020, I'm expecting an event to happen in 2020. And our president has kicked off the year, with more stuff. Black people, where is your mind today? When I got this book, I realized there's a dimension missing in this whole year. Maybe I'll can scratch at it a little bit. It is homosexuality, being gay. I mean, gay and things like that. And it's not like humanity started out all so heterosexual, right? Sexuality has always been expressed in all its many forms and rainbows that we have affirmed today in parades and whatnot. Um, but yeah, what about back in the day? White folks too now, you know, they're the gay community. They got their martyrs and challenges. They've had to stay hidden, right? But the black folks, our struggle is apparent because of our skin color. It's always right there in front. But the closeted person has their challenges, and that group, that segment of society that's always been, um, you know, had homosexuality been an obvious uh, phenomenon that you could discern in a person, and if the power group had decided to enslave them, that they would have shared our story, right? So just give a shout out to LGBTQ plus. I'm not sure what. I mean, the alphabet keeps going, so I'm not up with the latest iteration, but I'll give you a shout out today. Black folks, where are you at today? Let me just say a quick word. We need a movement. I think we need a connection or not. That's something I was thinking about. As far as you think about groups who rise up, flourish in America. It is those who not only have you know a stake here, but it's if they can really go reach back into their history and find their homelands and motherlands and stuff like that. I haven't heard much, but maybe the Haley family is that much better because they've got an African root to which they can reflect on and have that be a rallying point for their people now that they're connected across the ocean. You look at any other group, they're connected. Well, Chinese, Vietnamese, Hmong, German, all the European people, folks, Hispanic folks, you know. See, but the Black American, like we don't really have that. The Native American was here, so they would have a different take on that argument. But us Black folks, I was just thinking whether we can make it a connection or acknowledging just our uniqueness in this American space. Uh, what does that argument look like? What's the ethics? What's the what course do we follow as a result of thinking on those kinds of things? Like I said, we talked about Drapetomania. That's the name of the book, but the Drapetomania is an actual scientific medical term. It's debunked today as pseudoscience, but it was a mental illness forwarded by a man named Samuel Cartwright, and it was an illness where, I've talked about this before, I believe. I think through maybe around the signers of the Declaration or whatever. But it's a mental illness. They called it a mental illness with a slave. This extreme urge to run away. So they made a scientific term and all this stuff. And the cure, if I remember correctly, I didn't go that far in my research this time. The cure is to beat the slave more, and that'll curtail the drapetomania. That'll get the drapetomania out of them. And of course, it's foolishness. You know, of course, you don't want to be under the lash, whip, compelled to work for free, and all this. Watching your daughter as she's blooming and budding, have masters get horny, drunk, or slave handlers, and have her. Yeah, you tend to want to run away from those situations, right? Mental illness. So this Samuel Cartwright, I'm sure he went on a lecture circuit and all this stuff around it. It's pseudoscience, right? Of course, you want to get out of that, and you know, uh, they want they increase the level of abuse to curtail this drapetomania. Harriet, um, at this part, we're still in chapter. We're just taking our time through chapter 45. Let me do this first, though. Check this off. Uh, I'm inspired to do this work by Uncle Tom's Cabin, one resource, other resources. But a man named Dr. Claude Anderson came on my radar at the end of 2018, and I've been hooked on him ever since. Read 3 of his works. I want you to get these if you can. I'll show you where. Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask. Black Labor, White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice, and Dr. Anderson's National Plan to Empower Black America. Powernomics. You can find Dr. Anderson and those resources at powernomics.com. Behind me, you see the hashtag #US2 symbol. You'll find Black women having their conversation and support there. I think it's it's on Facebook and Twitter. You know how to use a hashtag. Probably a lot better than I do. Check out Black Enough, BLAGGENUF, Black Facebook Experience. And if you've got a business, entrepreneurial mind, check out Dr. Boyce Watkins at the Black Business School. Let him know Tomlin's Nyback from 365 Days sent you. And finally, we are walking through the last bit of Uncle Tom's Cabin. I'm going to miss that work once we get through with it, but it's a journey that we had to take. And I tell you, any fictional work of slavery is going to get the conversation rolling. Uncle Tom's Cabin did that very well for us. All right. And in this section, Stowe she's reaching out to the South. She's speaking to the South. Now, in the South, this book was banned in the South because of its, its content. So, the power group doesn't want to have a bad face. So, it's going to, of course, it's going to ban, it's the truth of what's going on, but they don't want it out. It's like some of the disciplines or some of the activity in my household happened. But your parents don't want that spilling out on the street, shouted from the rooftops, right? That's what's happening in the South with Stowe. They did not like her, what she was singing, and this book, and all this stuff is a crime to have it in the South. All the propaganda, power stuff going on. Um, she even mentions, she says, my book is a kind of sanitized version of slavery. Yeah, Drapetomania has some pretty heavy stuff going on, and I agree with Stowe. Like, oh, Prue's death, Tom being beaten and tortured to death, right? Uh, those are the common occurrences, right? We're not talking about brutality, being burned alive, maybe dismembered, castrated, some of these things going on, worked to death. If your slave master is not of doesn't have a whole lot of altruistic heart and outreach, what happens when you get old? What happens when you can't work, get crippled on the job, right? There's no pension or, right, workers' rights organizations, unions. No, there's no protection, right? You're just at the mercy of this white man's will. And if he is a drunken brute, well, you're going to get a Legree type character. Legree is probably, he might match up to appear to be a good guy compared to some other white man out there that makes Legree look like Mike from the Brady Bunch. That's intense. In the South, you get bit by a snake, well, you want to see if you live or not. You get injured on the job, well, hopefully you form cysts, infections don't set in, and you live, are able to, able to live. Virgin females, probably across the board, had their virginity taken by white men, right? And then this, you have in the black household this whole stigma, the nature of their relationship, where um, it's not so much the virginity, it's the white man, the power group is infiltrated right down to the closest union you can have in the flesh. There is your white master facilitating that conversation. Church life. Dr. Anderson brings this out a lot. Stowe didn't have this facet in her book, but in a church life, the black church initially did not happen without, she's got Tom kind of leading worships and services and things like that. That's an extremely liberal, free version of the black church in slave times, because the black gatherings, churches, and things like that was had a white witness, right? Because getting back to issues of meritorious manumission, things like that. But the idea you don't want blacks gathering, because then they're going to start being creative and organizing and things like that. No, not in the Southern black church. There was always a white man there to oversee the things, make sure the blacks were putting on at least a good act of loving God and appreciating the white man's presence in that service. right? Just always that reminder, that mental pressure applied. Right? Slavery is a total, you just can't overemphasize the holistic approach, nature of slavery. And that kind of constant pressure, micromanagement is, that drives me crazy when an individual or group is like on me, and if I feel them breathing over my shoulder, right? That's slavery, right? That would, men and women like me back then would be so messed up, right? And then trying to navigate that kind of constant pressure all the time. The North is not left untouched either now. uh, you know, she says, "Where's humanity stand?" Right, and she wants the Northern Church to be leaders in this fight, and wants the North to be Northern Church. You know, yeah, modeled almost after the Quakers. The Quakers weren't big on supporting slavery; they were against it. They're against war. They're pacifists. So she's appealing to them. You know, she says, the North doesn't have an apology, the apology of education or custom. What she means is, I think she's reflecting on some Plato actually there. Apology meaning defense, of defense of the system. I think she's saying there that the South has a lot of probably, well, the South has a lot of justification for its treatment, as false as it is. But the South's narrative is, the white man is better and stuff like that. Black people need to be enslaved. I just learned, I was studying a little bit of Aristotle last semester, and he had one aspect for Aristotle in regards to the nature of the slave is that the slave is naturally a slave. A slave can be nothing but other than a slave. They're born to be of service in these ways to white people. Now, education was not huge in the new nation. Well, we don't see, I mean, if you really are going to be educated, you went back to Europe, and there was probably your exposure to better forms of philosophy, formal philosophy, and things like that, right? So I feel like she's referring to Socrates' Apology, and Plato has a lot of dialogues, and one of them is the Apology, where Socrates is laying out his case before uh, the Greek government, before he's takes poison. Um, that's a whole nother story. That's way off topic. Um, but I think it's appropriate here. Her use of apology is what stands out. If you read the text, you'll see it. In either case, the North is just as guilty. While the North was free states, but the North. You think of any industry, and you're going to have your exceptions and loopholes and things like that, and um, maybe you didn't have open slavery in the North, but if there's like money to be made and you've got a business mind, you're going to get it done regardless of the geographical area. Um, so she's given us a clue that this slave industry is not some nice convenient line on a map where slavery's down here, free up here, but you had all kinds of overlap going on with this business of slavery. She's appealed to the South, appeals to the North. She just, closed up. She gets a little preachy, and she's proselytizing, I think, a little bit, for her God. It's the signs of the times, though. America was once considered a Christian nation. That's all that. You don't hear that ever anywhere. But that's all the time we got today. Thanks for just hanging out. We're going to get into some serious stuff. A couple more days. We got a few more days to finish up her concluding remarks. Then we got to look at start to hit with some facts, get into some factual stuff here. I'm way over time. Thanks for joining me again. I'm Tomlin's Nyback. That's 365 days towards racial change, day 293 out of the way. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.